Okay, it's recording.
Okay. The meeting is called to order. Just like last time, I guess I'd remind everybody, if you have something to say, feel free to raise your hand or use the raise hand feature or use the chat. I guess Sarah and Rachel will be helping to monitor the chat like last time. I guess, there is a sign-in sheet for attendance. I'm not sure, Rachel, if you have the link, could you put that in the chat? And
I'll
if that
send that out in an email afterwards. I didn't get the link ready.
Okay, that'll be emailed out to the CATS list afterward. Are there any additions to the agenda? Okay, if not, we'll move on to the approval of minutes of our August 12th meeting. Were there any changes or corrections to the minutes? If there are no changes, the minutes are approved as written. For the chair's report, I just had one thing that was also emailed out to the list, and that's just to point out that Ross, our secretary, had to step down from that position. And so Xiaochen Lin from Lincolnwood has graciously volunteered and been appointed to fill the secretary position to the end of the term through June. So thank you, Xiaochen. Next, we will go to CCS staff reports and start with Rachel.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I've got a number of issues to present on today at the staff reports. The first is an update on the post-migration catalog cleanup. So when Palatine and Grades Lake records were loaded, numerous junk tags were added to the records, such as 9XX fields and unapproved 690s, as well as numerous duplicates that were added to the catalog. Identifying the junk tags and cleaning up the catalog is an ongoing process. So far, I've removed the majority of the junk tags that were in the 9XX fields, except for the 690s. So deduplicating the records has really been the priority. It's hard to estimate the number of duplicates that are left. However, there are about 3,000 records to review that matched the OCLC number. After we have deduplicated those, we'll do another round of deduplication using the ISBN and UPC as a match. And we do have 3 other volunteers that have been helping Virginia and I to duplicate it. And so once more of the deduplication is done, I'll be working more on trying to remove the unapproved 690s. Doing that will take a longer period of time because I do need to review record sets to make sure that when I delete all the 690s in bulk, I don't delete the wrong ones, because we still have 690s that we want to keep that are the approved ones, and I need to make sure that I can identify those in the records first. So far I have removed only about 4,000 of the 690s. So because this will take a longer period of time of reviewing the record sets, it will be something that I'll be working on throughout the year. So I do have one important reminder today. Librarian has found a number of final records that are missing the 8XX field. This is the authorized heading for the series title, and it is required to be in the records when there is a 490. So if you do see that you found a record without an authorized heading and one does not exist yet in OCLC, then you can contact help@ccslib.org and Virginia can create the authorized heading. So next on the list is an update from Scrap. Scrap has been very productive this fiscal year. We've had 2 meetings this quarter. The October 14th meeting discussed Palatine's request to be able to add the forthcoming title records. Scrap voted to recommend it. So CCS subsequently sent out a survey to acquisitions and passed. Then the topic was brought to the database manager. So Deborah will be briefing you more on that topic and the result of the discussion during her staff report. In the last 2 meetings, Scrap did discuss a number of changes that need to be made to the catalog wiki. A full list of changes that will be made are available in the meeting minutes from the meetings. Some of these changes include deleting unnecessary and obsolete pages, removing national standards on pages that should just have local standards on them. However, one of the more notable discussions we had was on the Lexile field. The L does not need to be removed in order for it to be properly indexed in Polaris. So previously the page did have instructions to remove the L, but that's been updated because that's no longer necessary. I've also updated the serials page to include more details on how the TOM should be coded so that it properly displays periodical and newspaper. And then I also created 2 new draft pages. One is on the guidelines for merging duplicate records, and the other is on the encoding level. So I'll be discussing the encoding level issue a bit more during the business section. We do have 2 action items that came from Scrap. So our first is the question of, do libraries still catalog leapfrog kits? So feel free to unmute yourself and respond or answer in chat. But if this is something you need to review, feel free to respond in the by emailing the listserv.
I'll jump in, Lori from Algonquin. Sorry, I don't have my video on today, but based on I've been working from home this week, so I haven't been able to go look on our shelf or anything. From what I can tell, we just have some of the actual game chip, the little chip cartridges, and we don't seem to have done any for years. So I think what we have is what we have, and I don't know that we're getting more of them. We seem to have transitioned to the play away stuff. So I don't know if that answers that question, if you were asking about kits specifically or just the games.
Okay. We do have mostly all no's in the chat. Jamie, did you have any other questions related to leapfrog kits or the
No, I think we just
page?
wanted to know if anybody still cataloged them, if we needed the wiki page.
Okay, it looks like all of the answers are no. Okay, so our next item is to approve the recommendation to supply book and audio in brackets in the 250 field for Vox Books and Wonder Books. When doing their research on this, it looked like there were a number of records that did not have an edition field, or various different editions were added. So the Scrap decision was to recommend to accept the edition field as it is, but add book and audio in brackets because the TOM does not exist for this type of material. So the edition statement would, if there was no edition statement in the 250 yet, you could just add book and audio in it and would not be required to add Vox Books or Wonder Books as an edition statement if it didn't appear as if it was an edition. So Jamie, would you like to start the voting process?
Sure, I can try. I think we have a poll set
Yes.
up in Zoom to take this vote. So Rachel, I don't know, can you just put there it is.
I have launched the poll.
Okay, the poll is launched. If everyone would like to cast their vote. Give it about maybe 5 more seconds. Okay, looks like all the votes are in and the motion carries.
Got a few coming in still, but
Okay.
73% said yes.
Okay, motion carries. And was that all from you, Rachel?
Yes.
Okay. So next we will move to actually Virginia will be next.
There I am. I'm just going to talk, cut a couple quick questions after Rachel mentioned about authorized headings. Just send me an email through the help desk. Make sure you tell me the title and the title control number, and I can either do a local or I can make a record and put in an OCLC running authorized headings. This also means names. So if you have a name that needs it, please send me the same information, name. If you want a blurb from the title page or anything else like that would be most helpful. There are a couple of new subject headings, including bubble tea and social distancing, quote, in parentheses, public health. Both of these have been added into the database, into the system, and they're free to use anytime you like. The next thing I have to say is that we'll be sending bibs to Markheim next week, probably about a week from tomorrow. I'm not sure how many they are yet. I have to play with that detail and figure that out on Friday. But usually it takes, others haven't had this before, new libraries, it takes about a day. We'll ask you to not to catalog new things or edit certain things that day, but usually I can send bibs to Markhive in the morning, and usually by about 5 o'clock at night, you should be able to be cataloging totally in the system again. I've been deleting doing a lot of database cleanup, including deleting lots of old HOOPA records, probably a couple thousand of them that have been sitting around waiting to be deleted, and they've got their wish. They've been deleted now. And the last thing, I'll send it to the CATS list, but there's some there's a new RDA toolkit coming out in next month. The new big news is that LC will not be following those new rules until until about July of 22. I guess they need to work on their policy statements to fit the new RDA toolkit. I'll forward the email I got at AutoCAT. I also saw it on PC list yesterday too. And as new people know, that we do offer, CCS does offer a group pricing for RDA toolkit too. And I think it's up next month or maybe January. But anyway, that's all my news. Any questions? That's it. That's my report.
Yes, no questions then. And I forgot to say, did anybody have any questions for Rachel and her report? Okay, so Deborah, you're next.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my PowerPoint. Give me 1 minute. hopefully, thumbs up if you could see my PowerPoint. Okay, awesome. All right, so I have a couple updates for the group. The first thing I wanted to talk about was the CCS web redesign project, which is currently underway after a bit of a delay due to COVID. So we have posted the RFP as of October 26th. So we are currently accepting proposals for our website redesign. The deadline for proposal submissions is December 11th. So we've got about another month to wait before we've got our proposals in. CCS will be reviewing the proposals and then selecting our vendors during January. We'll begin working with our selected vendor at the end of January, beginning of February, with a goal of launching our new website in the summer of 2021. So in the RFP, we have included consolidation of all of our website interfaces into one as part of the project. So it would be combining ccslib.org, learning, our learning website, our training website, as well as the catalogers wiki as well. We've requested in the RFP granular permissions so that staff can continue to contribute and edit the cataloging wiki as part of the redesign. We'll wait to see what the proposals look like and the cost estimates for the project. We haven't gotten any back yet, but we still have 1 month to get those proposals in. So as we have more information to share with the group, we'll make sure that we send it out. But we are really, really excited for this project. And I know it's been a source of frustration for our members that we have so many different websites for all of you to check for information. So hopefully with this project, we'll be able to just make our web experience much more user-friendly for all of our members. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm really excited. I hope everybody's really excited as well for the new website. So then my next update is our planned upgrade of the training database to Polaris 6.6. Oops, I see a question in the chat. There's something in the chat.
Green asks, will the help desk still be separate?
Yes, the help desk will still be separate from the website. That's a good question. So moving back to Polaris 6.6, we are planning to upgrade our training server to Polaris 6.6 on Tuesday, November 24th. I still need to confirm that date with Innovative, but once they confirm it, we'll be able to put it in the newsletter this Friday. New Polaris features in 6.6 include serials check-in in Leap, as well as posting print notices in Leap. So those are the two big features. This is a smaller release 6.6. These are the two big features that are included in that release. We do not plan at this time that we will upgrade production to 6.6 this year. We are planning to wait until 6.7 is released. It'll be released next month. And our plan right now is that we'd upgrade to both 6.6 and 6.7 in early 2021. 6.7 features are pretty exciting, I think. It'll include bid bulk change in Leap and then copy cataloging in Leap, which according to Innovative at their latest 6.7 webinar should also include bib editing in Leap as well. So fingers crossed that comes true. We haven't seen the full specs for 6.7 yet, but again, we are going to update training to 6.6 so that staff can kind of play around with those features, including serials check-in, but we'll wait to upgrade production until 6.7 comes out, and then we'll do a big update to both 6.6 and then 6.7. I'm going to pop in the chat. I'm going to pop in the chat a link to Innovative's product board for Polaris. Hopefully that link will work. It will, it includes or lists out some of the features that will be coming to Polaris in 2021. One of the big ones is going to be acquisitions in Leap. So 2021 is going to be a big year for development for Polaris and for Leap itself. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some really exciting changes coming our way. Any questions on that? Nothing? Okay. Then we're going to move on to the next one. As Rachel and Jamie mentioned, the Palatine Public Library has brought a request to CCS, which has been reviewed by a couple of groups so far. So many of you have participated in our recent discussions about allowing forthcoming title records. We've discussed it at Scrap, database management, and many of you also participated in a recent survey that was sent out to acquisitions and past listservs. So I want to take a few moments to introduce this subject and then gather some feedback and insights from this group on the topic. So what exactly is a forthcoming title record? So a forthcoming title record is a bid record for an item or title that hasn't been released yet and is not yet available for purchase from a supplier. So an example of a forthcoming title could be movies still in the theater that you can't order yet from Midwest Tape, popular streaming shows that aren't available for pre-order on DVD or Blu-ray, or possibly anticipated books by popular authors that have been announced, but they're not yet available for pre-order by the library from like Baker and Taylor or Ingram. So here's an example of what a forthcoming title record could be. Taylor Swift's Miss Americana. So this title was released on Netflix earlier this year, but it's not currently available for libraries to purchase in physical format, whether that's Blu-ray, DVD, combo pack, etc. So it's only available streaming on Netflix. So this forthcoming title record was created to allow patrons to place holds on the title while the library waits for it to be released, rather than staff having to like manually track those holds on paper. So Palatine, this has been a long-standing practice over at the Palatine Public Library. So they did bring it to CCS as a request for consideration to allow CCS to continue to allow them and other interested libraries to continue this practice. So their workflow, and if someone's here from Palatine, please feel free to chime in and add any comments you might have. Their workflow is that a patron will request a title that's not yet available for purchase, and then the library will create a record for the requested format, whether that's Blu-ray, DVD, large type, book, and so on. Because they've created this record, then patrons search for and place holds on these titles in the catalog. And then when the title becomes available for the library to purchase, the library upgrades the bid record to include all of the relevant information. And then if the item or title never becomes available, they'll delete the holds and the record after 18 months. So where are we at in this discussion? The first group we took this to for discussion was Scrap, and they discussed it at their October meeting. So at the meeting, they discussed all the different considerations of whether or not we'd want to add these types of record to the database. How would that impact acquisitions? How would it impact cataloging workflow? How would it impact patrons, selectors, holds management? There's a lot of things to consider with this subject. At the end of the discussion, they did recommend that CCS allow libraries to create forthcoming title records. So after the discussion at Scrap, we sent out a survey to the acquisitions and public services listserv so that we could get some more feedback from those groups. So we got a lot of responses. We got 42 responses, and I'll share some of the results of that on the next slide. So after we sent that survey out, database management met earlier this week on Monday. And at that meeting, we couldn't come to a conclusion. We did want some more information on the topic and more time to discuss. So we're going to schedule an additional meeting in December to continue the discussion and to actually vote on whether CCS would want to allow libraries to optionally add forthcoming title records. So in the surveys, I just want to quickly review the big picture of the responses we got back. We heard back from 42 staff members representing 25 libraries. We heard back from 26 public services staff and then 16 technical services / acquisition staff. And one of the questions we asked was, how supportive are you of allowing forthcoming title records to be created? And this will show you the breakdown of those responses. So 45.2% said that they were not supportive of allowing libraries to add these kinds of records. But we did have 9.5% of respondents say they were very supportive, and 23.8% say that they were somewhat supportive, with then the remainder, 14.3%, being somewhat unsupportive. So when we asked if libraries were to, if we were to allow forthcoming records to be created, would your library be interested in using it? About half of us are kind of on the fence of whether we would want to take advantage of a feature like this. 41.5% said no, that they wouldn't want to take or be interested in using, and 9.8% said yes. So today we are hoping to gather some additional feedback from this group on the potential issues that you see, and as well like the potential benefits you see from a cataloger's perspective, so that we can bring this information over to the next database management discussion, which again will be the first week or two in December. We haven't set the exact date yet. So I am going to turn this over to the group so that we can hear what everybody thinks. And don't all speak at once. This is a big topic and there are a lot of things to consider. So feel free to chime in the chat or to unmute yourself and talk to the group. Again, just about as catalogers, how are you feeling about this? What are your thoughts?
This is Kathy from McHenry, and I have mixed thoughts on this. We've allowed this with the Midwest tape forthcoming records, and that was a mixed bag. I think if we could certainly learn from what we did there in terms of having procedures in place if we choose to go ahead with this. For me, I think obviously the pro is having something out there for the patrons to put holds on, to help our selectors gauge how many copies they may wish to order based on that demand they'll be able to see on those records. But for me, the biggest con, of course, comes in our world when we're trying to reconcile a forthcoming record with later vendor records and then final cataloging, because honestly, those forthcoming records have no information that would be helpful in what we're doing when we're getting good quality records in the database. So what are someone else's thoughts?
We do have a number of questions that are in the chat, Deborah. So the first one is from Karine. And she asks, isn't this a patron-based acquisition strategy? And this would judge the interest of patrons wanting the library to actually purchase it by seeing how many holds are generated.
Essentially, right? That's in one aspect, that is what it is that you're creating records for upcoming titles that you haven't ordered, and it is helpful to gauge patron interest. I don't think, and I'm not sure if anyone from Palatine is here. Yes, I see a hand raised. I'm not sure if that's the intent at Palatine, is to be sort of patron-driven acquisition strategy, or if it's rather more of service to the patron. They've asked for this title, you're going to input it and give them an easy way to track their hold and request.
I would say it's almost both of that in a sense, because a big part of it is if you're getting a lot of requests for something that people know a title is out there or they're interested, it's a way to make sure those holds are getting in there fairly, that people aren't jumping ahead of others, and then it does also help track interest so that you know how many to order when it's available. But the main purpose, that's almost a benefit. The main purpose really is to make sure that the members understand that we're responding to their requests and their wants right away.
Our next question is, who will be responsible for making sure that they are full records?
That's a good question. In CCS, we're currently drafting a sample workflow and best practices for, again, if we're to move forward with this, what would the workflow be? At this time, I would assume, and I'm interested to hear what this group thinks, that the library that has items on the forthcoming title would be responsible for then upgrading the record when they're able to order it from the vendor. But I'm interested again to hear your thoughts on that, and any suggestions that you would have to make this workflow work.
A possible issue with that might be if there are two libraries on the forthcoming record that's just for a title on DVD, say, and then one library orders the rental and one library orders a different version, for example, the non-rental, then does the first one who gets theirs change the forthcoming record to their version, and then the other one just fixes it if they get a different version and moves to another record? Then they'd have to move the holds and straighten that out. So that's one issue, that the forthcoming records are just for a title. They're not for a particular version or from a particular vendor. So I don't know if you might want to consider different forthcoming records for each library rather than having multiple libraries share the same record. I don't know.
I think that's an interesting suggestion. How does anyone else feel about having, again, this would not be required in any capacity, but libraries who are interested, how do we feel about each library having their own forthcoming record?
Well, Richard Stewart responded that it was his concern and thinks that there would be multiple libraries with holds on records for popular titles.
This is Brad from Cary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Very yes.
One of my issues is that what happens if a movie keeps on getting delayed? The new Ryan Reynolds movie's been delayed twice now and been like a week away from theaters both times, and they've pushed it back to this point sometime next year. Or would it be, if it gets a new pub date, is that 18 months set over again? It could keep going on, and especially if this opens up to video games can get stuck in development for 5-6 years sometimes. So we're really going to have the records that long, or keep deleting and creating and deleting and creating every 18 months? And the other issue is we just got past the whole thing with Midwest Tape having like 7 different records for DVD on order, and we've been kind of condensing them down, and now we're going to reopen this back up to having 8 or 9 versions having things on hold. And another thought is title changes. Who's in charge of it when the title changes? Because for a lot of times, some of these movies or DVDs or video games or CDs, titles change, and whose responsibility is it to change that?
And with the holds, another thing to consider is that that holds currently expire after 12 months, I think, right? So if this forthcoming title hasn't come out in 12 months and there are holds, I mean, like Brad's suggesting, you could extend the record another 18 months, but then what about the holds? Because then those would start dropping off.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely a concern. You're right, holds expire after 12 months. So library, and you can't bulk update hold expiration dates. So it would be a manual process that would need to be done by the library whose patrons holds they were. So I agree that that could potentially be concerning, and a bit of, it'd be a lot of work for a library to, again, continue to extend holds on a record.
And on that, I'm sorry, since you just mentioned too, the library would have to cancel their own patrons holds. My library is one that was pretty not in favor of having these records, and certainly we wouldn't use them here. So if it was implemented and our patrons were able to place holds on other libraries' forthcoming records, then when the titles didn't come out, we would be responsible for that work of canceling all the holds. And that, I don't know that that seems really fair, since we didn't want to use the records in the first place.
Yeah. I agree. One of the best practices we'd likely need to put in place is that holdable settings for the items on these would need to be restricted to only holds of that library's patrons. That way, again, if Niles opts out, it seems unfair that then Niles would have work to do to cancel their own patron hold. So we would need to, I think really we need to limit patron holds to only that library who's taking advantage of the record.
We do have a question in the chat. The question is, can you please highlight some of the positive aspects that were discussed?
I think the primary positive piece to this is, again, that customer service to your patrons. And this is something database management talked is, how should we view this? Should we view this as like this is a reviewing this from a customer service perspective, is that patrons want to place hold on these titles. So we're going to allow them to do that, or staff time it takes to manage. So how do we balance this? Primarily, though, it seems like the positive aspect, again, is that the patrons can have a request placed on the title they're waiting for. They don't have to continually check back with the library to see if they've ordered a title. And then the other positive feedback that we got was that it would allow selectors to gauge popularity of a title before they have actually order X number of copies. So again, for that sort of like patron driven acquisition aspect, and then for the patrons who like to place holds, it allows them just to have the request in the system and wait for that.
Okay, and
on the flip side of that too, I will say that we did get some feedback that it could create depending on how long a title is delayed, it could create an unrealistic hold list as well, though. For example, patrons who request the title and then within the year and a half, no longer want it or move out of the service area or so on. So it may not be quite an accurate picture of how many patrons want the title by the time the item comes out.
John, you had your hand raised?
Yes. If there is a forthcoming record and somebody else wanted to bring in an on-order record, could we have both?
What does the group think? It's a good question.
I think we would have to be able to have both, because if, say, Palatine has their forthcoming record for something, and then it is available to be ordered later, and we go in and order it, we're not going to know that there was a forthcoming record there. We're just going to bring in our on-order records like normal. So there would have to be, we'd have to be okay with the forthcoming record and our legit on-order record coexisting. I don't think there would be any way around that.
That sounds good. And if we take care of the holds, then it shouldn't be a problem if our patrons wouldn't be able to place holds on that, and then it would all get sorted out when the DVD comes, right?
I think that was the thinking that Scrap settled on too, that as long as holds are restricted to the libraries that put their item on a forthcoming record, then that'd be fine with me. If Palatine wants to do it, as long as my patrons aren't getting all involved in it, because then we have to straighten that out later.
Right. And as long as I don't have to clean up the duplicates.
Right.
That's on Palatine, then it sounds good to me.
We do have a couple of points that were made in chat. Jessica said that if a library opts out, it could cause those patrons to be disadvantaged in the holds queue when the item is actually released. And Lynn stated, from a public service perspective, limiting the holds can cause patrons to be upset if patrons see that other libraries have the records, but our library does not.
So can I ask, can we make a suggestion that either you have an item on a forthcoming record, or you have an item on an on order or record, and that the forthcoming is not actually upgraded, but people move their items and their holds over to a more permanent record when they've got something ordered, and then nothing will ever get mixed up, and people who want to use the forthcoming can, and people who don't have to.
So would that be the preference of others, is that the forthcoming record would only exist as a forthcoming record? That record would never be upgraded, but the items and the holds would be transferred over to an on order record when that is imported into the system.
Cassie does have her hand raised.
Yes, there was something that Jamie had suggested that that each library, if they're choosing to use forthcoming title records, have their own individual. I'm not in favor of that because of the clutter that would create in the database. Just like when we have libraries loading on order records and creating countless duplicates out there. This is meant to be easy for our patrons and to help them. So the fewer records, the better. If we're using forthcoming records, then it needs to be one for the title or the version of the title, such as large print versus regular print, Blu-ray versus DVD. And I honestly don't have a problem with having a single forthcoming title record and then a single on order title record, because now that we can move holds and have that place in line be kept. And I think most of us have our holds set so that our patrons' holds fill against our own items before they go out into interlibrary loan. I don't have a problem with it as long as we can be very, very cautious and, you know, agree to the rule sets that we do this.
We did have a question of how many libraries would use the forthcoming records. So according to the survey, there were 4 that said yes, but of those 4, they were from 2 different libraries. And then there were a larger number that said maybe.
If our public services staff said that they wanted to use them, then we would be using them.
I'm gonna ask what could be a tricky question that we might not have answers for. Is there anything you would say we shouldn't add forthcoming records for? I did ask this of Palatine, and the response I got was that I believe you don't add foreign film, forthcoming records, nonfiction or documentary, forthcoming records, but system-wide, would there be any restrictions we'd want to place on what could or couldn't be added as a forthcoming title? I didn't have any like solid criteria that I could think of why we wouldn't. If this is to be approved by database management, we'd need to go to scrap and then to this group as well to write and draft bib standards and then best practices for procedures. So we'll have the opportunity to talk about like what information you need for the bib record in order to enter one of these. So something like a title, you know, I don't think, well, maybe we would, I don't know. We'll talk about this when the time comes. But I would assume we wouldn't want like James Patterson, upcoming book 1, 2023 as like a forthcoming record, right? We would probably need a title so that patrons would know what they're placing holds on. But if anyone thinks of any other like criteria we would have for when to add or when not to add, I think that'd be helpful. So you can share them now, or you can send us some emails if you think of them after the meeting.
I can't raise my hand because I'm co-host. But oh shoot. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can hear you.
Okay. I don't know if I'd say not allow, but I would be really concerned about things from streaming services just because sometimes they never become available. And if they show up when people are searching, whether they can place holds or not, then I feel like we're going to start getting calls like, is this coming out? And like, no, we don't even know. Like things that come out in theaters, we know those are going to eventually come, but like how many people have asked at our service desks for the Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, and we're like, it's probably never coming.
Yeah, and Karin has a comment in chat that we would need wording in the record to help patrons know the title has not been ordered and their hold would only be filled after the item was purchased. And I think we'd also want to include in there that specifically saying the title might never be ordered, at which point your hold would be canceled and you'd be notified or whatever. We also might want to try to add something somewhere, I don't know if in the title field or somewhere that's very clear that says forthcoming or something. So it's easier to see both in the pack and in LEAP that the title is not a regular title that has actually been ordered.
Corinne would like to see the example record again.
Let me pull that back up.
Those are not the bibliographic standards that we would follow. We did talk about bibliographic standards at scrap. And to summarize that, it would be that the 100 field would have to have only a real author's name in it. However, if you can see in the example that it is not a real author's name, and that any of the notes that you would suggest related to forthcoming titles and that it might not be authored or it might not be ordered would be in the 500 fields, like a 520 field, so that it would be visible in the display. And also the 945 field is a good idea to use so that we can quickly identify the forthcoming records when running reports. So any of these notes that are in these 260 fields, those could be placed in note fields like the 520 field.
Yeah, and this is just a record that came over during the Palatine data load. The Palatine has not added any new records since joining CCS, so these are all older ones that came over during the data load. So again, as Rachel said, this isn't following the criteria we'll establish, but Palatine has already said, they're willing to go back and upgrade and update any of the existing records that did come over to whatever our new standards would be. If again, this is to be approved. Yeah, Karin asked in the chat if any other library consortia are doing this currently. We have reached out to a few other library consortia in the area to get some feedback from them and if this is something that they do or don't do, but I'm still waiting to hear back, so I'm not sure. I don't believe Swan or Pinnacle does this, but I'm waiting for some confirmation from them.
Joe would like to see how the record would look like in the pack.
Let me see if I could pull that up. And again, the existing records don't follow standards that we would set. But so we would want to make sure that it seems there's some, we want to make sure that patrons understand that it hasn't been ordered yet. So here is just what this particular record looks like in the pack. It would look different depending on what standards we would set as a consortia. So this one thing Scrap briefly discussed would be to put, come on, go back. Something in a summary so that it would come up here on the hit list for patrons to see. Anyone have any other thoughts, any questions, any considerations? Everyone is welcome to attend the database management discussion if you're interested. Again, I sent out a doodle poll to the group to set the December meeting. I'm waiting for everyone to respond to that poll, but once they do, we will set that meeting date and then we'll share it in CCS News. So anyone is welcome to attend, and I'd encourage you to attend the meeting if you want to participate in the discussion. Yeah, and there's a comment in the chat from Penny saying that public services staff might say this is a great idea, but from a cataloging standpoint, there are some problems that would go along with it. So 100%, we want to make sure we're getting all the voices into this discussion. So if you have any more comments, thoughts that come up after the meeting, feel free to send them my way. I'm going to summarize all the comments we got here for our December database management meeting. But if you have anything else that you want to add to the discussion, please send me an email or give me a call. We can chat about it.
So that's it from you, Deborah? Okay.
All I got.
Okay. So there's quite a few things left on the agenda. Is there any interest in a 5-minute break, or should we just go on? Can you say in the chat or out loud if anybody want a short break?
I think we can go on.
We have one go on. Okay, let's go on. So we have Lynn and Sandy to present on the LCGFT heading Novels of Manners and Regency Fiction.
Okay, so I promised to be brief. This is a presentation that we did for PAS to talk about the genre headings, Regency Fiction, and Novels of Manners. So what's the difference? Well, Regency Fiction is described by GSAFD as historical works set during the late 18th and early 19th century up to the reign of Queen Victoria. And LCGFT describes novels of manners as realistic fiction that describes in detail the customs, habits, values, and expectations of a particular society. A lot of Regency novels are also novels of manners, but it's a popular style for works set in that, because it's a popular style for works set in that period. But if you, as you can see in my fancy Venn diagram, not all Regency fiction are novels of manners, and not all novels of manners are Regency fiction. So if you can bump to the next one, please, Rachel. Because LCGFT doesn't recognize Regency fiction as a genre heading, they recommended using novels of manners instead. But patrons really aren't going to look for their next Regency romance with a search of novels of manners. It doesn't mean anything to them. And so we'd like to keep Regency fiction as a genre heading to be used as a local genre heading. Using both when appropriate will keep that sort of see also working for those patrons. And you can go on. And that's what it looks like in the catalog. You all don't need all those explanations. We would just like to keep using both. All right, I'm done. Sandy, you have anything to add to that? Did I miss anything important?
Nope, you did good.
Are there any questions on Regency fiction or novels of manners?
And also, Lynn and Sandy had gotten feedback from PAS, right? And it was overwhelmingly accepting of what Lynn just suggested, keeping both headings.
Yes, it was overwhelmingly positive. Yeah, thanks. That's a good point.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Next, we will have an overview of vendor cataloging workflow from Rachel.
So one of the important discussions that Scrap has had in the last 2 meetings has been on the topic of the import profiles and the import profiles specifically that are used for the vendor cataloged records and how these records can overlay final records that are already in the database. So before moving on to that topic, it is important to understand what vendor cataloged records are. So I was asked to begin the presentation on that topic by providing an overview of vendor cataloging practices first. So what are vendor cataloged records? So vendor cataloged records are final records, but you're probably more familiar with the vendor records that you get as on order records, which are not final. There are 2 libraries in CCS that I'm aware of who do have accounts with Baker and Taylor's customized library services to work as outsourced staff to catalog the final records and process the books by placing the labels on the books, like the spine label, a new sticker, and barcodes. When Baker and Taylor's staff do catalog the items for their library accounts, all records begin as an OCLC record. Many of the updates that Baker and Taylor staff complete, though, do not end up back into OCLC, but are saved in their own database. So Baker and Taylor has more than one cataloging department. The Bridgewater, New Jersey department actually catalogs children's books shortly after publication. These records can be identified by the OCLC code NJBWBT in the 040 field. These records only have Library of Congress children's subject headings, and they're still considered full-level records. These records are saved to OCLC in this state. Baker and Taylor does not have any other catalog record updates that they save in OCLC unless a library specifies it as part of their account procedures. When this is done for a library, updates to OCLC records will be done using the library's OCLC account so that updates on behalf of that library appear as if they have the library's own OCLC code in the 040 field and not Baker and Taylor's code. Many libraries do not require this of the CLS department, and so many corrections to the records are just saved back to Baker and Taylor's database and to the library's file before they're downloaded by the library. The main Customized Library Service Department, or CLS, is in Momence, Illinois, which is near Kankakee. However, there may be other cities that are still also doing CLS work at this time. When I did work at Momence, there were 50 copy catalogers in the department and only 1 part-time MLS librarian doing cataloging. So if you are interested in learning more or seeing their warehouse, it is an interesting warehouse to tour. You are welcome to request a tour of the warehouse in Momence at any point. Although right now you probably can't until the social distancing guidelines are over. So each library account does have a standard account procedure document, or SAP, that describes the library's requirements. So this can include things like adding the subfield Q to the OTO, adding prefixes, cutters, and following any local practices to create final records. So the copy catalogers who work on the records do have their work reviewed for quality according to the SAP. New copy catalogers are reviewed by the higher level copy catalogers. And if it's found that they do make mistakes, then they don't receive their production bonus, or if they've started receiving their production bonus can have a deduction. And So they are held accountable for mistakes as an incentive in order to improve. If a library does review their own work and finds that mistakes have been made, they can contact Baker and Taylor to complain about the mistakes in the record, which really just includes the mistakes such as not following the standard account procedures. And so if a copy cataloger makes too many mistakes, they can actually lose their production bonus and their work will be placed under a review again. So Baker and Taylor can be pretty strict about reviewing the records, but if a copy cataloger's records are not being reviewed, it really is up to the library to find those mistakes and complain so that the copy catalogers can be held responsible. So that brings us to the next topic of the encoding level and how it relates to the import profiles. So Scrap has discussed concern about the issue of how those vendor cataloged records can be imported in a way that can erase the work that one has completed at your local libraries. So libraries that do import the vendor cataloged records use the duplicate detection rules that save the record with the highest encoding level. If that encoding level matches, it rejects the incoming record. So Polaris views level I or blank as equally full level. Importing an I or blank will be rejected if the record existing in the catalog is I or blank. However, it will overlay any other lower level records like M, K, 8, or 7. So the recommended practice at this time is that if you do not want your records to be overlaid by any incoming records, you should change your record to I or blank. However, if for some reason you're okay with it being overlaid, you can leave it as a lower level record.
Rachel,
Yes,
could you go back to the previous slide real quick?
sure.
So that is if you don't want your record overlaid by a record that's using this import profile that looks at encoding level.
Yes.
It's not just to prevent your record being overlaid in general, because we don't
Right.
have a way to do that. Just wanted to clarify that.
Right. It's just for this specific profile.
Mm-hmm.
So the way to edit the leader is to double click on the LDR tag. Then the leader editing screen will open and you will need to change the encoding level 17 to I or blank. So before this year, OCLC only allowed certain libraries to use blank, but as of 2020, they have decided that everyone can use blank now. So if you'd like, you can go ahead and start using blank. But all encoding levels are still allowed in OCLC, so you can continue to use I if you'd like. And John LaValle has also suggested that he could edit the local practices macro to make that change automatically for those that use OCLC connection. But before he does that, I thought it would be good to make sure that everyone is okay with updating that macro to include that step. And I've also added a draft page to the wiki describing this encoding level recommendation. So I was wondering if anyone was actually against updating the local practices macro to change the encoding level.
I think it sounds like a good idea.
Okay, great. So since there's no objections, I'll just move on. So the next thing on my list to talk about is a review of the criteria that is used for setting OCLC holdings. So when Palatine and Grays Lake's data was loaded, a question was brought to my attention about the 945 fields that were added to records. Oh, I see John's hand was raised. Did you want to go back to the previous topic first before I move on?
I did. Is this being presented as accepted practice?
The encoding level is a recommendation. It's not a required practice.
I meant allowing vendors to catalog.
Oh, it's acceptable because they are considered final level records, and it's up to the library to decide if they want to purchase services. So it's really just outsourcing their cataloging instead of doing it locally.
John, do you have particular concerns about it?
Well, I'm concerned that this happened without, I certainly didn't know it was happening until a month ago. And I didn't know that records could be overlaid. And I don't know which records have been overlaid.
You didn't know that records could be overlaid based on encoding level?
Correct.
Okay.
But more importantly, I didn't know vendors were doing that to my records, potentially.
I mean, we certainly allow libraries to outsource their cataloging to vendors. Again, we only have 2 libraries that are doing that. Those vendors do need to catalog the bib records they provide according to CCS standards. So there's, I guess I'm not quite sure, John, what is the issue or the question?
Well, in the example on the PowerPoint back a couple slides ago, there was a squirrel girl example that needed 2 more genre headings and a subject heading. What was shown wasn't incorrect, it was just incomplete. And now that I know that their bonuses are affected on mistakes, they're not going to be encouraged to go above and beyond. But beside that,
The example that I showed was just electronic resources records. So
right.
That's not like the best example of Baker and Taylor's work.
I think it is actually. I mean, regardless, the print is going to look the same. I would feel more comfortable if I knew. I mean, I know we don't sign our records anymore, but I would feel better if they would sign their records in a more consistent, clear place, like an 099, because this is Wild West territory. I have no idea what they're doing, and they're not coming to our meetings. And
well, John, for me though, they do have pretty detailed procedures set up with the library that explain what our guidelines are and how to follow them. And for me, I don't really see the big difference in having the vendors copy catalogers catalog to my specifications versus having a copy cataloger in my department catalog to my specifications. They're getting word of what I'm expecting. And if something's not being done the way I want it, I should be able to communicate with them and, like Rachel said, and clear it up.
So if we go back to the idea of that electronic resources record, that one example was just an example of the New Jersey office in Bridgewater. That's finished just for children's books shortly after publication. But then if a library's standard account procedures has specifications like if there's only the children's subject headings, make sure to add the non-children's subject headings, the regular Library of Congress subject headings, and delete the children's subject headings. So that could be an example of what a library would require. They regularly say, to delete the children's subject headings and not leave them in instead of accepting that level of record as it is. So it's really up to the library to describe the local practices as detailed as possible. Kathy?
John, I remember from our training that we had talked about using encoding level as a criteria for overlaying records. I don't believe we pursued it in the consortium because we have seen countless times that just because it's a level I record doesn't mean it's good. There are some very robust records that are level K or less because people are not changing the encoding level when they're enhancing records. And like you, this is the first I've heard of the vendors actually doing this themselves, because I honestly thought, and I've had conversations with Tim at Evanston about this when we were looking at vendor cataloging, but that their cataloging staff are the ones importing those bib records. And I didn't realize that we have libraries that aren't doing that, or that they're using a profile different from the standard ones the rest of us are using. So I honestly don't know. And when I think about some of the work involved, yeah, when you put that changing the encoding level into the macro before we import out a connection, that's going to be a time saver. And we have ability to do macros and bulk bib changes in Polaris, which would certainly be helpful. So, I mean, there's ways that we can address this, but I really have some mixed feelings on this, and maybe having libraries sign off on their records again, or who had the last edit, is the way to go, so that we can at least trace what's being done. And if we need to look at a vendor load coming in deteriorating the integrity of what we already have out there, that we can trace it back to the library working with that vendor or libraries, so one of them can look, so they can look at those SAPs and determine what needs to be corrected so that the records are good.
We have been given copies of the SAPs from the two libraries that do use Baker and Taylor's services, and so the members are in the process of reviewing them to see if anything needs to be corrected. And so I do have one suggestion, and that could be that the two libraries that do use vendor catalogs records have regular reviews of their records to make sure that the steps are being followed, and to report any areas where the copy catalogers and catalogers aren't properly following them back to Baker and Taylor, and to hold them accountable for any mistakes.
But I honestly thought if someone was working with the vendor to do cataloging, that was an expectation, is that they would vet those records before or after loading them, so that we're not just getting schlock in our database. I mean, all the rest of us are accountable for our work, so that accountability needs to be there for all of us, so that someone is not getting cost savings at the expense of every other cataloger and every other library in CCS.
Sandy, you do have your hand raised. Feel free to talk and respond.
Yeah, I would like to address actually both of the people who recently spoke. John is correct that Baker and Taylor only follows what's in the SAP. So if they find a record in OCLC for a historical fiction book that has a 655 for historical fiction GSAFD, they will flip it to historical fiction LCGFT as per our SAP. But if that 655 is missing altogether, they will not add it. They don't do any kind of, subject analysis to add headings that are missing, because they're just copy catalogers. However, we know that, and we do review every record that we get from CLS and correct them, and add missing headings. And they also miss a lot of illustrations for some reason. We get a lot of records with no 300 subfield B for illustrations for books that actually have illustrations, so we fix that. They miss a lot of Roman numerals for some reason at the beginning of the pages, and we fix that. So we are reviewing every record that we get from CLS after the book comes in, or whatever we order from them.
Sandy, is the records without 655s, is that not something that could be added to the SAP to add 655s?
No, because again, these are just copy catalogers. They don't do any kind of analysis. It's almost like programming a computer. They can, you know, flip something to something else, but they don't do any independent analysis and add things that aren't there. We actually tried to have them do that with fictitious characters once, and it was a disaster.
If you're following up on the records that come in, then that's fine with me. How they get here is of no concern as long as you're looking at them.
But some libraries might not be able to look at all the records that they get from CLS.
I thought there were only 2 of us that were ordering from
Well, there
CLS.
are, and I'm talking about the other one. I think that's the case with them. They are not able to do that.
Is there someone here from Evanston that has experience working with your CLS records that would like to speak on your workflow?
Not to put anyone on the spot.
I'm from Evanston. I do copy cataloging for nonfiction, and I do look at all the nonfiction that come through. I do look at those, but I know that we are not able to look at every fiction or Juve item that comes through. We do keep a record of any errors that we find, and previous to COVID, we were having a monthly meeting and with Baker and Taylor, where we would give them an error report on what was happening. So that's what we do.
Lynn, I saw your hand raised earlier. Did you want to speak still?
I guess, yeah, I do. Thanks. My concern is that, like John said, and others have said, if you're reviewing those records for accuracy, then I have no problem with it. But my staff is also very lean, and we get a high volume of materials in. I have 1 copy cataloger, and in order to protect the integrity of our records from records that are coming in that aren't being checked and aren't mine, my copy cataloger is going to have to either learn an entirely new way of doing her job, or she's going to have to change, like start doing that, putting in the eye, something she's never done before on every record she brings in. So my staff is going to have a lot more work when it's already lean and we get a ton of those in. So I feel like someone else's solution to high volume, low staff is going to hurt my workflow in the same circumstances. So that's frustrating to me. I feel like if they checked their records, I'd be fine with it. But I have a problem with records that haven't been checked overwriting my records, and with the workflow involved in preventing that, if that makes sense.
Can I ask what the agenda point was to actually cover today? I mean, certainly to Rachel's point is that both of our libraries that take advantage of the CLS service have certain standards and procedures that the vendor is required to follow. And again, they should be cataloging those records up to CCS standards. But I guess I'm a little unclear on what the agenda item is to cover today. We're not here to discuss whether or not Evanston or Indian Trail should use CLS records. That's a decision made locally at their library. But I think what we're here to discuss is those import profile settings and then the encoding level of our existing records. I do understand the questions being brought up about workflow, but when it comes to those import settings, it seems to me, and those of you who are more familiar with them, please feel free to chime in. If we have bib records that are already fully cataloged, the vendor records from Indian Trails and Evanston shouldn't overlay those, correct?
Correct. We have our profile set not to overlay anything with an IR blank.
So records that are upgraded and worked on by our catalogers at other libraries shouldn't be replaced per those libraries import profiles.
What about eights?
Eights are pre-publication, so they're lower level than full level.
So if we have an 8 record that's replaced by a CLS record, is that seems acceptable, correct? Is that
Well,
8 hasn't been upgraded?
Deborah, so they're saying in Polaris, the encoding level might still say 8, even though locally we're editing it up to full.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying we're doing full I level cataloging, but we're not changing the encoding level to I.
Is that a normal practice when you are upgrading a record to change the encoding level so that it's accurate?
No, we've always, since I've been here, we've totally disregarded the encoding level locally because it hasn't mattered.
Mm-hmm.
When vendors do catalog the level 8 records, they do change the encoding level to blank after they've completed the 300 field and reviewed the record.
And also I would, to answer Deborah's question about what was the point on the agenda, it was kind of mainly informational to make sure that people were aware that vendor cataloged records were coming in as full records, because like John and I think others, Kathy and others said, we weren't really aware that was happening. And I don't personally have any issue with it, but I wasn't even aware that that was happening until probably within the last year. So this was just mainly to get us all on the same page so we know that it's happening and people can think about if they have any concerns about it. That was the main point of it. So I'm not surprised that people have questions and concerns coming up now, because some people are probably just learning at this meeting that the practice was happening, which is fine that people have those concerns.
Yeah, can I ask just a workflow question? When you're upgrading a record, whether that's in Connection or within the Polaris database itself, how much additional time does it take to upgrade the encoding level to not be pre-publication?
It would take a couple seconds to do it, but the concern that's being expressed is it's one more thing that copy catalogers have to remember to do.
Kathy, you have your hand raised.
Maybe what would be helpful, because John has offered to add changing the encoding level to I or blank to the connection macro, and maybe we could have a similar kind of macro function in Polaris, because we do have the ability to create macros. So if that could be kind of coupled with some other local practice things that we're supposed to be doing, that might be an easier and less painful fix. What does anyone else think?
I don't know that macros in Polaris work the same as macros in Connection. I think it's more just like text strings, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the macros in Polaris are much more complex to use than they should be, and it's probably a lot quicker to just click on the leader field to edit it.
Well, I've got a macro that I use, because when I import records, honestly, the only matching point we use at McHenry is the OCLC number. So I'm not matching on ISBN, so I'm not possibly overlaying a read along kit with a book or vice versa. And I've got a macro and it does kind of put the keystrokes in, but it flags the record that I'm going to overlay the record, and then it adds in the text so I can paste in the OCLC number. So I know that it can do some nice things. I've not expanded any use on the macros, but I'm just kicking that out there as a possibility, because if it's something that can be done with like a quick couple of keystrokes versus having to remember to go in and open this, kind of like, you know, do a control I and it changes the encoding level, or a control E or whatever, you know, key sequence you choose to program it into.
I can play around with the Polaris macro and see if I can get it to work out.
Richard Stewart asked in chat, I'm hearing a concern about the workload of upgrading encoding levels. Can that be done in batch in Polaris?
It can be done in batch.
It could. So again, somebody would have to do it. So I don't know if that would work for John and whoever else is concerned about it, to maybe monthly go in and find your records that needed to be changed to I or blank.
Yeah, I don't know how you would identify the records unless you did it with the 049 and said,
yeah,
anything that didn't say JED can't be overlaid by vendors, which that could be something to look into. If it has an 049 that isn't JED and or a 994, however we're identifying, because that's kind of how we're identifying final records.
Well, it would just be your own records, right? So you could maybe look for anything with an 049 GK8 and then encoding level that was not I or blank. And then you could change the encoding level. Because you just want to change your own records, right?
Someone could, in theory, yes. I mean,
you're saying CCS go in and make the change periodically?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible in Mark Edit, but that becomes extremely labor intensive, even in batch.
I think you can change the encoding level in a big bulk change, I'm pretty sure. So that's pretty easy. It might take a while depending on how many records are in the bulk update, but that could be done.
I guess too, I would go back to the premise of what people are saying. The problem is, like, there's some issue with full cataloged vendor records, and I guess I would argue I don't see what the problem is that I need to solve by changing the encoding level. I haven't particularly seen big issues with these CLS records that I don't see in other records that are cataloged by non-CLS libraries. I don't know if John or others maybe would want to share some of, like, what are the bigger issues that you're seeing in the vendor CLS records? Or maybe since you didn't know about them, you haven't noticed.
I've never seen one. I don't know how to identify them.
Brad, you're the one that brought the topic to our attention. Would you like to contribute?
Sure. So when I had discovered it, I noticed that when I was changing items from new, and then at that point, I usually check to see if there's a Lexile available that's not on the record, and I'll put it in. And when I was doing that, I noticed that a lot of the genre fields that I would have put in, that there were now no 655. So I went and looked, and sure enough, they were being overlain, and all my work as far as to that. And if there wasn't 800 or 490 that wasn't in there that should have been, or it didn't have, or that sometimes we have in CCS different title structures for series fiction, because I mostly do juvenile fiction. So I noticed that if how we do Dork Diaries might be different than how the record showed, and we all have them all look the same, and now it's back to the way it looks for the previous ones. Or if I had put in a 246.3 for a number in the title, that wasn't there anymore. So it was really The issue is that it's stuff that I had done and taken the time to put in. Now it was all gone because the encoding level got kicked back, was overwritten by an importer record. So all that work I'd done, all that time was now gone. That was my issue. And if I take the time to do that, I want it still to be there. Or at least have someone else in the consortium be looking at it and changing it if there wasn't an error that I had made and not no one else. So just because it had just been imported in, that was my main concern.
And I admit that's the part where where I have the problem is our staffs. We do not have the robust cataloging staffs we once did. Many of us are running with leaner departments. And when we're looking at the time invested that we're making to have a great database that's helpful and useful to our public service librarians and our patrons, and then to have that good quality work overwritten with something that may meet the SAP, but it's not meeting our local BIB standards, where we're talking about adding genre headings, adding subject headings, that the data is being overlaid with something that is less than the work that any of us would have put into that same BIB record, bringing it in.
And Brad, you've been changing your encoding level for a while. Have you been finding that that has been a successful solution for you?
Yeah, now that I've changed it to I, that doesn't happen anymore. And I understand people not wanting to do it and why they have to do it, not liking the fact. But if you get in the habit of it, it's not the hardest thing in the world, but it is frustrating that I even have to do it to begin with, but it does fix the problem.
Okay, so maybe those libraries that are concerned about it could maybe start paying attention to the encoding level. And Rachel, I think, had mentioned to Scrap that she would go over the SAPs of Evanston Indian Trails and make sure that there's not anything missing from those that we would want to make sure is there. Is that right, Rachel? You're gonna
Yes.
look at that.
We can, I know some people have already worked on reviewing them from Scrap, so I can definitely read through them when I have time and see if there's anything else that's missing.
Okay, and Karin had one more question from the chat. Does the import profile we use for downloading vendor records, I guess on order records, have encoding level as criteria? And I don't believe,
no.
If Karin's asking about on order records, then no. Those usually just, if there's a match, it'll not overlay and add your retention tags.
Right.
If there's no match, then it'll load the record, but it does not look at encoding level.
Right. The profiles for on order records should reject the record, but add the retention tags.
Yeah. Okay, so I think we can move on from
One
here.
more, sorry,
Yep.
one more last thing, and I don't know if, I'll be quick. Is it possible for the vendors to clearly identify their record? Like in an 099 vendor catalog data?
It is.
Like for Indian Trails, there's a 949 with the batch number from Romance. So it's the letters MOM followed by the number of the batch.
Are 949s being deleted as part of database cleanup?
I'm not
I'll
sure.
have to look at our Polaris settings.
And Evanston, do you have a signal?
If you do have a question about it, you can also look in the I don't remember what it's called off the top of my head.
Properties?
The properties. I keep thinking it's profile, but it's properties. The
Yeah.
properties, it will give a file name of the last file that was overlaid. If it begins with the letters MOM, then that's the vendor cataloged record that came from Moments.
Yeah, I don't have time to do that.
Right.
seriously, an 099 would just cover it.
Okay, maybe Rachel
That's
could
my
look into
suggestion.
that too with Evanston and see if there's some kind of flag they could put in like Indian Trails has.
Well, since the 099 is considered a classification number, I'd maybe suggest using something like a 999 field instead, or something that wouldn't be as visible.
Yeah, and if anyone does have any suggestions for both changes to encoding levels that CCS can perform, I think we need to nail down some criteria for how we could upgrade encoding level to not be 8 or pre-publication, but that's something maybe we could talk with Scrap about if there is something CCS centrally can do to ensure our records don't get overlaid if we don't want to. But I think we do need to maybe talk about that criteria and what that would look like. But we're happy to do the work if that's something we feel would be helpful for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Rachel, if you'd like to go back to the OCLC holdings.
Sure. Okay, so when Palatine and Grays Lakes data was loaded, a question was brought to my attention about the 945 fields that they found were in the on order records. So in the past, adding the 945 was important for knowing not to set holdings and on those records, and also was used for creating files for Marchive. Currently, Bob is not using the 945 field at all when generating the files for holdings, but Virginia does still use it to remove local records from the files for Marchive, but does still use the 099 field to identify on order records. So adding the 945 field to on order records is not necessary anymore. This is not in the catalog wiki at this point. However, if you do continue to add it to your on order records, it won't be a problem. So the 945 is really only needed for local items that will never be cataloged in OCLC. So OHM is the current service that CCS is using to set holdings. It was created by the Swan Consortium to replace TMQ. The criteria that is used for creating the file that is sent to OHM includes a combination of settings from the bibliographic and item records. So these include the exclusion of bibliographic records with the MARC type of material for the different electronic resources types, the exclusion of the records that do not display in the pack, the exclusion of item material types for electronic resources and local items like book club bags, equipment, Steam kits, hotspots, and on order records, as well as the inclusion or the exclusion of the item statuses for on order and in process, the exclusion of certain branches, and then the resulting file will only contain the 001 field, 035 field, 245, and the 852. The 852 is the information from the item record. So the 001 is not repeatable in these files, nor is the 245. The 035 is repeatable and will contain multiple OCLC numbers, such as the obsolete numbers in the file. So how does OHM process the files to set holdings? It first identifies the OCLC number in the 035 by the prefix OCOLC. If there is more than one, it chooses the largest number and considers that to be the most recent number. OHM then compares the bibliographic control number, the OCLC number, and the library's OCLC symbols in the current file to the previous file to determine which records have been added or deleted. Once it determines that, it sends a file to OCLC via the API. It sends the list of deletions first before the additions. So that allows it to be accurate to make sure everything has been deleted first. For example, if the ILS record number changes due to a record merge, but the holdings library and the OCLC number stay the same. It will first send a message to delete the record that was deleted, and then send the message to add the new record. So this addition process of sending the deletions first and then the additions after that ensures the accuracy. Because the 945 is not included in that process anymore, there is still a small amount of records that do have 945s in it, but also have OCLC numbers. So those would still have holding set. And Jamie has reviewed a record set to look at that small amount. Would you like to comment on what you found in that record set, Jamie?
Not really, but I can share it with the group after. I can email the record set. Or in one of my emails about this meeting, I included a SQL query that libraries could find their records that have a 945 but have OCLC holdings. But I can email that out after the meeting.
Right. So it really was a small amount that was found that would still have holdings. Some were set because the record was, say, something like an umbrella, but the record for the umbrella was created in OCLC instead of locally. And some were just books that were considered local books, but there was already an OCLC number in the record. So it wasn't a very large amount. Does anyone have any questions about this process?
Okay. So again, just to clarify then, putting a 945 OCLC do not set in the bib record will not prevent OCLC holdings being set. Just want to make sure everybody's clear on that, that the OCLC holdings being set does not consider the 945 at all. It considers item criteria and these other things that Rachel just went over. So really just wanted to make sure everybody was aware of that.
And if you are cataloging a local item, you can still use the OCLC record. And if you don't want the holding set, you can remove the OCLC number if it's going to be for a local item. That's, say, a book, for example, that you would still want to not have your holdings set on or something like that.
Okay. Thank you, Rachel. I think we can move on to serials coded as monographs, which is referring to the workaround that CAMM decided to start in 2018. And this is the thing where, well, actually I wanted to do two things with this agenda item. One is mainly just to make sure that all of the libraries were aware of this practice, since we've had several new libraries join since then. And I know at least one of them wasn't aware that we had been doing it. And then the other thing was to see if there was any interest in revisiting and making sure that it's something we wanted to continue. So I don't want to get into a whole big discussion about it, because of course we did that 2 years ago, but just for some brief background so everybody's on the same page with it. Polaris has an issue with serial records that are not magazines. So for example, Guinness Book of Records. If someone for one of these titles places a hold in the pack, it will place it as an item level hold on a specific barcode rather than volume level hold, which is what we'd prefer. And so to trick Polaris into doing volume level holds, we decided to go into the bib record for these titles and in the leader, change the bib level from S serial to M monograph. And when it's M, Polaris is totally fine with doing volume level holds for the title. And so that works fine, and that kind of solves that problem, but it does have some other drawbacks with how the titles are displayed, both in PAC and in LEAP. So then if someone pulls up Guinness Book of Records, instead of saying serial and with no date, so that it's clear there are multiple volumes in the record, it'll say book 2002, or whatever the first date of the serial is. So I guess I wanted to maybe find out if there's any interest in the group with maybe getting feedback from past or user experience to see if these display issues were causing any problems for them, or if they were okay with what we're doing, or if maybe we should just go back to having the item level holds and the things cataloged correctly. I don't know. I guess I would ask Rachel and maybe Deborah, is it possible we could get feedback from the other groups on those display issues to make sure it's something that is not causing problems for them?
I'd say yes, absolutely. PASS is a meeting coming up in December, so we can bring this to that group to see if they've noticed or heard any feedback from patrons.
Okay, and because I wasn't really sure, it's a cataloging thing, but I wasn't sure if this group would have strong feelings about it since it doesn't really affect our workflow at all. I think CCS either has been or will start, since it's been brought up, will start periodically changing the S's to M's on their own. So I don't know, but I guess we get feedback from the other groups. I would like that. Karin does ask in chat, is this something Polaris is never going to fix in future release? There is an idea lab for making volume level holds work for serials. It got all the way to the very end, basically, as a future possibility, which means it's not ruled out, but correct me if I'm wrong, Deborah, I think it basically means they'll consider it, but not at the moment. So it's gone as far as it can go. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. And Jamie and Sarah are also on Idea Lab, but from my understanding, those future possibilities kind of sit in there until Innovative has the opportunity and resources needed to look back at them and add them to future releases. Sarah says, for all our great ideas soon to go to die, which is true, because if you look at the number of CCS ideas that are future possibilities, they're sitting in there, but haven't been slated for development yet. So maybe they'll fix it one day, but at this point, I don't see it in any future product plans.
So maybe does anybody else have any questions or thoughts on it? If not, maybe then I can talk to Deborah and Rachel about bringing this to the other groups to see if they have feedback.
Yeah.
But does anyone else have questions?
Brad does.
Brad, yes.
I actually noticed last week when I was going to catalog the new Guinness, something happened and now it's classified as a C, and a bunch of errors happened in the 008, and all the ISBNs are gone and all the catalog information, like all the notes, are missing from it. It looks like a totally different record from last year.
Oh, well, I don't know about the missing fields and stuff. Somebody can certainly look into that, but I would point out this workaround has caused something others have probably noticed, where if you catalog something that's a serial and then you try to save it, it's going to say, oh, the 008's all screwed up because it's expecting an M008, but the 008's cataloged as a serial like it was before. And you should just be able to disregard that and save past it. But yeah, I don't know about all the 020s and all that stuff. Somebody should look at that.
Okay. I just wondered if there's some sort of correlation, but if there isn't.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Okay, so I guess that is all for that one. Technical services, open discussion. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, concerns? Okay, Kathy asks in chat, given that we catalog select titles on monograph versus serial records, is that something we could have the other groups consider for all book Serials. So Kathy, you mean like what we did for travel guides, seeing if we should do that for all serials on monographs?
Yes.
Oh, gosh.
I know that's a lot of work, but that's one way that whole problem goes away.
Yeah. If you want to go down that road, I would suggest maybe, I guess, starting with scrap. Rachel and Deborah, should we do that if Kathy wanted to bring that up?
I think that seems like a good place for it to start. So Kathy, I just want to make sure I understand. You're talking about maybe expanding. So right now it's travel guides, test prep, I can't remember, text, I don't remember, but you're to consider expanding that beyond that group to have standalone monograph records.
Yeah, it's just a thought, because then we don't worry about saving errors and permissions and losing data if something goes wonky when things are being saved. I feel rather ambivalent about it, honestly, but what's going to give us the best customer service to our patrons is, I guess, the ultimate question.
Okay, so maybe, Kathy, I know you say you're ambivalent right now, but if you feel stronger about it and you want to pursue it, let, I guess, me or let Rachel know, and we could bring it up at scrap. Does anybody else have anything they want to discuss related to anything cataloging, really acquisitions, processing, any tech services questions for the group? I'm not hearing any, so we can move to announcements. Kathy had something she wanted to share.
Yes, please join me in welcoming our newest tech services team member, Shirley Reutberg. Shirley is here with us today. She has accepted the position for our lead cataloger, which is our copy cataloging position. She will have some original work when she's completely settled. And she has been asking some really, really great questions. So if she approaches any of you, then please her with the same grace and knowledge that make this just such a great group to be a part of.
Excellent, welcome. Thank you, Kathy. Gail also had something she'd like to say.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to let you all know that as of November 27th, I will be retiring from my position as head of IT and technical services at the Wilmette Public Library. I will wonderfully, though, be able to continue in a part-time consulting capacity. So I'm still going to be around, but I won't be head of tech services anymore. And I also wanted to say another thing, that the job is posted on Rails and at the Wilmette Public Library website. So please take a look if you're interested. And also, I just wanted to say thank you to this group. I've been part of CCS for 38 years and counting, and it's been a wonderful group to work with. And I really appreciate everyone's knowledge and contribution to the group. I think the catalogers group, well, I'm going backwards, the cataloger/CAMM group is one of the best groups in CCS, the ones that are most active and engaged. And just thank you for letting me be a part of this group for so long.
Thank you, Gail.
Thank you.
Becky, it's just you and me now. We're the only ones left.
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking about that too. I get to go first, John.
Okay.
I've been here for 20 some years, 20 years now too, guys, so.
I know there are some of us oldsters around.
Karen also.
Yeah, Karen's been here a long time.
Okay, does anybody have anything else before we adjourn? Okay, I guess that's it. We're adjourned. Thank you, everybody.